Welcome to the introductory lesson on crime and deviance. We're going to have a look at the concept of deviance within this particular lesson, and this runs alongside the PowerPoint and the resources in your booklet that you need to work through during this week. So one of the things we need to begin with when we look at deviance within the crime and deviance topic is the difference between deviance and criminal activity or criminal behaviour. So Downes and Rock give a really useful definition whereby they highlight that deviance is something that is perhaps banned, something that is controlled, or a behaviour that's likely to attract some form of punishment or disapproval from wider members of society. Deviance is not necessarily something that is bad, so there is simply a difference in a particular behaviour that goes against what is considered social norms at that time and in that particular place within society. So, for example, drinking alcohol is legal in the UK at 18 years old. However, in many states of America, it is 21 years old before you're allowed to drink alcohol. This would mean that your behaviour in the UK at 18, if you go to a bar to buy a drink, would be considered normal, and yet in America, the same behaviour would be considered deviant. Okay, so it's the approach to how behaviour changes over time, and it gets you to think about how it's not necessarily an inherently different behaviour, but it is the way in which that behaviour is interpreted. So overall, deviance is a form of action or behaviour that goes against those dominant social norms, and that can be social norms within a specific society, within a specific group within that society, and usually it has it causes some form of reaction, usually critical, or some form of disapproval. Right? However, like we've mentioned, it does depend on context. So, for example, here we have the guy wearing socks and sandals. Not criminal behaviour, but would be considered deviance in that it goes against the norms of how you would wear sandals in a wider society. You've got Britney Spears to the right there, displaying ultimate deviance in going well beyond the whole double denim concept into what looks like about 5 layers of denim. Again, deviates from society's norms and what we would expect in terms of clothing, however, is not criminal or bad behaviour. And then you've got the nails that have been painted at the bottom there in that picture. Again, a normal behaviour unless you are in school and you're year 11 or below, in which case you would be hauled into detention and have your nail varnish removed. So again, it is an action that creates a disapproval and criticism, but only within that particular context of being in school at that particular age and time. So deviance, when it's used in sort of day-to-day language, does tend to have negative overtones. It tends to be seen as something that is bad or that is wrong, and quite often it's used interchangeably with criminal behaviour, and that's not necessarily correct. So from a sociological perspective, when we think about deviance, we're looking at it more generally. So we look at both positive and negative deviance. We look at why something is created or labelled as particularly deviant. And we also look at how deviance can change over time and how it can indicate social change and changes and shifts in moral and social values and norms. One of the issues with deviance is that it's not as clear-cut as crime. So to define crime or criminal behaviour, there is usually a law that has been passed that explicitly states that something cannot take place. So for example, theft, vandalism, they go against a very clearly defined legal definition. However, when it comes to deviance, this idea of classifying something as good or bad involves society or individuals in society taking a moral standpoint. So this means that you take a position where you judge different forms of behaviour based on your own moral code or your own moral values or your social norms within that particular time or context. So if you have a look at the pictures on this screen, we're looking at deviance. So you have the lady who is a builder as your first picture. Again, you wouldn't necessarily classify building as a job as a deviant behaviour. However, having a female builder does go against dominant social norms of appropriate jobs for women. It goes against the norms of who usually goes into this sort of career area, so it's male dominated, and therefore it would actually be considered as a deviation from the norms that are undertaken in society. The second image, you have a gay couple. So again, in terms of behaviour, it's behaviour that is normalised a little more in society, but this is quite a good example of behaviour that has shifted from criminal, where you could be prosecuted and charged and in fact given prison sentences and chemical castration for this kind of behaviour, right through to decriminalisation, still with quite significant deviance attached to it in a negative tone in society, through to contemporary modern British society, where same-sex relationships are accepted more within social norms. However, they do still deviate from what is the majority relationship. So deviance has a number of different layers that you need to consider when you're looking at behaviours. Number 3 is a little boy playing with a doll. We've looked at gender expectations, particularly in family, but also you will have looked at these in education, in line with things like gender specific subject choice and masculine and feminine stereotypes. So again, the little boy playing with a doll deviates from what is considered a normal behaviour for boys and the types of toys that they play with. However, the behaviour in itself is not good or bad. It's a neutral behaviour, so therefore it's only the moral judgment of that behaviour which makes it deviant. And finally, you have a picture of a man who works in childcare. Again, breaking those stereotypical norms attached to the appropriate kinds of jobs for men and for women in society. So breaking down some of those gender roles. Again, nothing inherently good or bad about that particular activity of playing with children, but it is connected to a moral standpoint from wider society, who do tend to judge different forms of employment by the individual's gender. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how deviant behaviour can change from criminal through to non-deviant, and how deviance has different levels within it. So you're looking at deviance as in it's not the norm in terms of a statistical kind of level, so it's not, it goes against the majority, and also deviance as going against a moral judgment and moral perspective on people's behaviour. So when we look at deviance, there's 2 important characteristics that you need to be picking out when you work through this section of your booklet. The first idea is subjectivity. So any decisions based on judgment are going to be subjective. So trying to define deviance becomes very, very difficult. This raises the question about whether any behaviour at all can be considered deviant in all circumstances, at all points in history, and across all societies. So that notion of constant change in the social construction of deviance raises those questions about who it is that is making the decisions, and that leads you into the idea of power, whereby who has the power in a society to control and determine what is classified as a deviant or non-deviant behaviour at any given time. So it's about looking at who has the strength or power within the hierarchy, whether that is going back to the nails within a school. So ultimately the people that decide would be your head teachers, your assistant head teachers and your teachers, who classify having your nails done as deviant behaviour if you're year 11 or under. And it also raises questions in wider society in terms of classifying broader deviant behaviour. So, for example, policies that might be put through by governments and campaigns that might be broadcast about who is behaving well and who is not behaving well. One thing that you do need to bear in mind is that all criminals are deviant, but not all deviants are criminals. And that goes on at two levels. It's firstly the behaviour and secondly the context. So, for example, if you are holding a person to gunpoint, about to shoot them, or you do shoot them, that would be criminal behaviour. You can't possess a gun in the UK, and you certainly can't go around shooting people. However, shooting a gun itself is a deviant behaviour because it's not something that the majority of people within the UK do. So when you're looking at people who may go to shooting ranges to practice shooting, like the second picture, they are deviant in that sense that this is not a normal everyday behaviour, but actually they're not criminal, because even though guns are illegal, they are allowed in certain circumstances. So it's about thinking on the different layers of context and the different layers of behaviour when you're deciding whether something is a criminal activity or whether something is a deviant activity. So after you've worked through the booklet, you'll find an exam practice question, which is getting you to have a think about 2 reasons why deviance can change over time. So when you're working through your notes, what you'll need to do is make sure you're picking out those changes, and those changes are generally down to social norms. So think about the changes in homosexuality going from criminal to deviant to non-deviant, and think about why and how those norms change. So in some ways it can be progression, so the rise in equality in the workplace, meaning that gender-based jobs are not sort of as split as they used to be, so that level of equality coming through. Think about diversity in society, so bringing in new ideas, new morals, new values, having different perspectives, and how that might mean that deviance has changed over time, and draw that together using the structure that's provided in your booklet. So remember, with an outline and explain question, it is levels based marking, so your overall answer is given the mark, but you do need to be very, very specific and clear when you're giving your points. So you must first of all identify the first reason why. So make that very clear. Your first sentence must be, one reason why is this, and very clearly state that. Develop that a little bit. So tell me what you mean by that reason, right? And then explain how that links to deviance changing over time. So make that connection between, I don't know, change in norms and values, link it to something specific that's changed over time, using that as an example. That'll help with your AO2 marks, and then work through that. You should support your reasons with a link to evidence or theory. This can be basic sociological definitions, sociological concepts. So as you go through your notes on deviance in your booklet, make sure you're picking out those key ideas from different people that explain the changes in deviance and how that's been researched. So that would be your first paragraph, and again repeat that for your second paragraph. Make sure that you're hitting those targets of detail, depth, lots of sociology. Try to avoid those common sense statements, and make links to definitions and key terms throughout that second part of your answer. If you have any questions or queries with anything in the PowerPoint, the booklet, or with the exam practice, please just pop a message onto Teams or send me an email if you want a more direct personal reply. So have a work through that, and your essay needs to be submitted through the assignments tab in Teams. Enjoy.